And now from Washington, the Inside Scoop. All the news the government does not want you to hear. Now, here's your host on the Inside Scoop, Mark Levine.
Welcome to the Inside Scoop, where we debate the issues of the day, and you have a chance to join in as well. I hope you do join in the conversation. It's easy to do. The number is right there in front of you. I'm your host, Mark Levine. I'm a former congressional attorney, used to work for the Democrats. My guest today is Melanie Scarborough. Now, she is a former columnist for the Washington Post, a current columnist for the Washington Examiner. And I often debate a Republican here. Melanie is a self-proclaimed libertarian. Now, she emphasizes not an official member of the Libertarian Party by any stretch, but at least that's where you're leaning these days. Is that fair?
Right.
Welcome to the Inside Scoop. Tell
Thank
me,
you.
Are you a former Republican turning libertarian, or how does that happen?
Well, I believe in maximum personal freedom and minimum government control, which used to be the position that liberals took. That was what defined a liberal, was someone who wanted the most freedom and the least government control. Obviously, that has changed dramatically in the past 30 years. And then conservatives took that brand, and then conservatives don't do that anymore. So really, libertarian is the refuge of those of us who consider ourselves, I guess, hardcore true conservatives or true liberals, depending on which way you want to look at it historically.
You know, the way I always divide it up, and tell me if you agree with this, is I always say Democrats, when it comes to your personal life, namely, you know, what religion you want, or who you decide to marry, or what you do with your own body, then liberals say government off, and Republicans say government on. But when it comes to public choices, a way to help you find a job or get you an education or health care, that's when Democrats say regulation on, help people on, and Republicans say it's off. And libertarians are sort of split down the middle. They say hands off in all those cases. Do you agree with that?
Pretty much. I think that liberals, if we're defining liberals by the people who now define themselves as liberals, not the way I think the word is fairly used, but they want restriction or regulation on everything except abortion and sodomy. And conservatives
look at medical marijuana. I mean, anything, or religion. Just
right.
give an example. Republicans want the government to instill religion in school kids. Democrats say, no, my religion is my private choice.
Republicans don't want the government to instill religion in school kids.
Sure they do.
No, they don't.
Well, what's the prayer in schools all about then?
That's about a personal freedom to want to be able to do that. It's not about, if a kid, the president of the senior class wants to have a prayer, if the school decides it at graduation, then that should be a matter of freedom. That's where the government should not intervene. And the Republicans, conservatives, would just say the school district should be able to make that choice versus the government making it, the government mandating that they may not do it.
See, here's what, I worked on this a little bit on the Hill. We all agree, all sides as far as I'm aware, that if a kid wants to individually pray in private or silent, or have a Christian prayer group after school that's voluntary, that's fine. What liberals believe is you shouldn't be involuntarily forced to sit and listen to a prayer to someone you don't believe in. So if you're a Christian, you don't have to hear the school, whether it's the student president or the school president or the teacher, recite prayers to Allah or Buddha or anyone else. So in that sense, I would say the Democrats are more for personal freedom, and Republicans are saying, no, you have to sit there and listen to someone who may teach you a religion you don't agree with.
But we are a country of majority rule, minority rights, and we've kind of turned that on its head now, where it's minority rule, and the majority has no rights, because the minority, that kid who wants to sit there and not have to listen to a prayer because he believes in Buddha, dictates whether the other kids can do it. And that's just not...
See, this is very interesting to me, because we're going to talk about all kinds of libertarian things, but I would argue on this particular principle, you're not a libertarian, because you're saying, in effect, the majority can take away the minority's freedom and insist that a certain religion be taught in a public school.
But there's no freedom there, because nobody is obligated to pray. If you want to ignore what somebody is saying, you're free to do that. I'm just saying that I think that the decision should rest, the more local you can get things, the better. And the decision should rest with the school district, with the school board, with the principal. It shouldn't be the federal government.
Individual? Isn't that what libertarianism is
Sure.
all about?
And anybody can get up and walk out if they don't want to have to hear the prayer. If they don't have to pray, they don't have to bow their heads. I'm not.
Can they pray loudly to their own God, and then each kid in there can all shout and pray loudly to their God and all try to convert each other?
No, because that's chaos.
Well, it is chaos, but it seems it's very interesting to me, because that's a distinction that usually I think of between liberals and conservatives. A liberal says, look, you shouldn't have the government telling you how to pray, why to pray, who to pray to, but so it's interesting that I think on this point, I don't know that all libertarians agree with you.
They probably wouldn't. I'm not,
I
said, I'm not representing the Libertarian Party. But you also, there's a tremendous logical inconsistency in the fact that Congress gives prayers, the Supreme Court has prayers. If the government does not impose on, if the government imposes on other people things that it does not live by itself.
But you don't see a difference between school children and the Supreme Court or Congress? I mean, Supreme Court has power to change its prayer.
True.
And Congress has power to some extent to change its prayer or to, but certainly a 10-year-old school kid who's taught one thing in church and a different thing in his school, I see the First Amendment really as saying, you know what, let's leave the church with the church and the state with the state.
I think there's a very big difference in allowing prayer in a school and proselytizing in a school. And if people are going into schools and proselytizing, that's one thing. That might be an infringement. But to simply say that you're free to do something, there's a freedom of religion. I mean, the separation of church and state means you can't impose a national religion. It doesn't mean that people can't practice religion in public settings.
Well, you say practice religion in public settings. Again, we both agree that kids can meet after school in voluntary prayer sessions. So we're not talking about freedom to pray.
Right.
What we're talking about is freedom to have an authority figure use a prayer in a public setting where the kids may not agree with that prayer. That's what we're talking about. Right? Is that fair?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, and that's where I would come down a majority rule.
All right. In other aspects, talking about individual freedom, it's not just abortion. I mean, look at drug laws. One of the things that you mentioned abortion and sodomy. Another thing that I know Democrats agree with very much freedom of choice is what you put in your own body, medical marijuana laws. Now, in the House of Representatives, you had Libertarian Ron Paul join with many Democrats in saying that if a state votes and the people vote to have medical marijuana and the patient wants it, that's fine. The federal government, of course, and the Republicans have said, sorry, you don't get to make that choice. We're imposing it. Where do you stand on that issue?
I would agree largely with the idea that medical marijuana I do agree with. And I think that the war on drugs, we've lost that, and it's just been, it's an expensive, futile effort. But I would not be for legalizing drugs because I don't think that's a victimless crime. And one of the major problems is we now have, I mean, if you were a drug addict and you had to take responsibility for your own actions, then that would be one thing. But when you have it where it's all this insurance, where everybody ends up paying if somebody has to go into rehab, if somebody can't hold a job, then you have the same argument you have for so many other things, that it's just not fair for you to impose the penalty on the rest of society.
I'm going to agree with you there. I think that while I would be for legalizing and liberalizing most of our drug laws, you got to pay the consequences. For example, if you smoke cigarettes, all right, and you can't afford your health care, I'm going to say you should die.
Right.
Isn't that harsh? It's very harsh. But you know what? That's your own consequence. You shouldn't have started smoking to begin with.
Right.
So while I agree that people have the freedom to smoke in their own homes, in my view, now I don't know, it's an interesting libertarian view, I think that your only right to smoke is where your own live. You don't have a right to blow that smoke out and endanger other people's health, because then you're impinging on others.
Well, but I would disagree with you when you think about the things like in Washington, D.C., where the government says that the owner of a restaurant, the owner of a bar can't allow smoking on his own premises. It's his facility. If he there again, it's like his private home. It's his private business. And if people are perfectly free not to go in there if they don't want to be exposed to the smoke. So I would still think that the freedom should be given to the proprietor to make his own decision.
I think it's a public place. Now, if you have a private club where people have to pay to join, like a country club or something like that, a smoking club, that's fine. But we know that, unfortunately, the way it works is there you have the tyranny of the minority. You have the minority of people who smoke in the United States, 20%, maybe 25%, something like that, who are imposing on the 75% of people who don't smoke and giving them disease and so forth. You know, if people want to wear little bubbles over their head and along with air vents so that they don't impinge on people, that's fine. But as a proud, intolerant non-smoker, I have to say that I see a real difference between smoking, where you can endanger my health, and drinking or even drugs, whatever, where you're just endangering your own health. That, you can go ahead and be stupid. I just don't want you to affect my life.
Right. Of course, in Washington, D.C., it's particularly hypocritical because you have the homeless population sleeping in public parks, sleeping on street grates where they're using that as public facilities. They're urinating on the benches. So that's a much more of a public health issue.
Where are they supposed to go?
There's shelters. The shelters are empty in many of them in
depends.
Washington, D.C. There are hundreds of beds.
No,
they're empty. There are plenty of empty beds. They won't go to them.
What are we going to do, confine them to shelters? I mean, these are free individuals who haven't committed a crime and don't have a home. How about the Democratic solution, giving them a home, giving them a chance to call their own? Homestead, like we used to do with land out in the Dakotas in the 1800s. Give someone a home for $1, and if they build it up and make it nice and keep it nice, they can keep it. If they don't, then they lose it.
HUD has plenty of problems, has plenty of programs like that. The problem with the incompetent
people... You don't support them, though.
I support some of them.
Oh, do you?
I do.
Okay, all right.
But I'm talking about people who are not competent to make those sorts of decisions, people who are, that's nothing compassionate,
People
leaving
who are
people on the
mentally
streets.
ill?
Yes.
All right.
But I'm saying it's more of a public health issue to have those people out and using public facilities as public restrooms. If the D.C. government wants to be consistent, then they need to say, yes, secondhand smoke is dangerous, but it's also dangerous to have public facilities where you have germs and needles.
Well, it's interesting you raise the question of the mentally ill, because I will agree with you that we have too mentally ill out on the street. There's a difference, I see a very strong difference, between a homeless person, and I'm sure they're in the minority, who doesn't have a drug problem and who isn't mentally ill and simply doesn't have a home. Right. I agree they're in the minority, and those that have drug and alcohol problems, and then those that are literally mentally ill. I'm sure you know, before the 1980s, most of those people were locked up.
Right.
And it was a policy change under Reagan and a Democratic Congress to say that we're not going to spend all this money on mental institutions, let them out, and then there's all this homeless problem. Right. To me, this raises the larger question of mentally ill and gives us a nice segue into gun control, which is what I was looking to do. There was an article on the front page of the Washington Post today about Cho, the murderer at Virginia Tech, and how he was ordered to be involuntarily committed by the judge, and then nobody followed it up. He was ordered for outpatient treatment, and he was told, go do it, and being mentally ill and not such a nice person, he basically ignored it, and nobody followed up. Now, that kind of thing costs money, and some would argue that that's regulation, that's government interfering in our lives. After all, you're telling an individual against his will, you need to seek help. I think that's absolutely necessary for a functioning society. What's your view?
Absolutely necessary. That's
Okay.
that's the problem. Is that as you said, deinstitutionalization was a mess. All it did was take people who could have been in institutions where they could have 3 meals a day and a clean bed, and threw them out on the street, and where they're now a danger to themselves and others in many situations. He's certainly being one of them, and. It's just this idea that community service boards, that people who are not competent are going to show up once a day to take their medicine. It's like expecting children to show up to eat their vegetables.
Right, it's just not going to happen.
Not going to happen.
Now, that costs money. And a lot of times when I hear talk to many libertarians, it's all about spending as little money as possible. I've heard some, you can call them radical libertarians, say unless it's government defense or roads, we're not paying for. You agree, it's absolutely necessary.
It's absolutely necessary, and it's a waste of money, because even though we put so much money now into these community service boards, we're in Virginia at least, we're still paying for the state hospitals and the state people and the people who run those. So we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars to have hospitals for the mentally ill that are empty, for the people who could be.
Are they empty? Are
pretty
there a lot
much.
of
We
empty
have.
Beds? My understanding is we're not even spending enough. I mean, the article today talked about the Community Services Board saying we don't have the money to check up on people like Cho.
But that's the Community Services Board. I would argue that they have the money. I think they do. I don't know where they're putting it, but I'm talking about the mental hospitals like Western State, Central State. I think the most population is about 3,000, and there are 9,000 people that are being employed to work there. So, because they still have their jobs.
Wait, 9,000?
9,000. It's 3 to every 1. Right.
And 3,000 mentally ill
right.
people.
And 30 years ago, there were 14,000 people in those mental. So there's plenty of.
That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense, but that's what the numbers are. And so, yeah, that's a tragedy that we have people who could be helped, and we don't send them where they could get help because of this.
Do you think that's an issue that Democrats and Republicans can come together on? I mean, particularly after the Virginia Tech shooting, shouldn't more? I mean, it's going to require more money, won't it? I mean, to institutionalize more people.
It could, but it would certainly be money well spent because it protects society and it protects the individual.
The toll-free number is 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275. Feel free to call in. You can agree with me, agree with Melanie, or disagree with both of us. All of that's perfectly fair. Some of you like to write in rather than call in. That's also fine. Just go to radioinsidescoop.com, post your comment on the blog, and we'll be reading some of them on the air. We'll be right back with issues of abortion and D.C. rights right after this.
Some people in Fairfax County don't know what public access means.
Some think it's just another channel on the dial.
But it's much more than that.
It's the voice of the people.
People like you.
Your neighbors,
your friends,
or your family.
People who want to share ideas,
opinions,
cultures,
lifestyles,
art,
sports, music,
events,
entertainment,
history,
science,
beliefs.
People who want to learn about television,
producing,
directing,
cameras, audio,
lighting,
editing, or radio, talk, music.
Whatever you think people should hear.
Public access is the place where everyone has a voice.
And it's the place where that voice gets heard.
A place where you can create your own form of personal expression.
So what do you want to say?
Whatever it is.
You can say it here.
Because we're public access.
For the people,
by the people. It is about balancing our choices between the gray of the concrete jungle and the stunning beauty of the real one, between a stoic facade of granite and the fury of the canyon. It's why there's EarthShare, the simple way to find balance. EarthShare is the workplace giving program bringing the leading environmental groups under one umbrella. Support EarthShare, support them all. EarthShare. Please ask your employer about workplace giving. To learn more, visit our website.
Thousands of kids in this country have everything it takes to go to college, except the money. The United Negro College Fund. A mind is a terrible thing to waste.
From Washington, back to the Inside Scoop with Mark Levine.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. The toll-free number, if you want to join in the conversation, is 888-488-MARK. Please join in. Ask us a question, disagree. That's all what part of this live show is about. My guest is Melanie Scarborough. She is a columnist for the Washington Examiner, a former columnist for the Washington Post. What is the Washington Examiner?
It's a newspaper that's been in Washington for the past couple of years. It was the old Hearst chain that was bought out, and it's doing very well. It's in Baltimore. It's in this area. It's in several cities around the country.
We'll have to check it out. We were talking about all the issues of the week, and we were talking about the Virginia Tech gunman. Now, that raises to me two very strong issues. One is of mental health, which we've discussed. The other is obviously gun control. And that's another issue where certainly Democrats and Republicans disagree, and I think where you and I disagree. In my view, people like, well, you'll probably agree with me that people like Joe shouldn't be getting guns.
Right.
I think you're going to agree with me. And I think you're also going to agree with me that at the very least we need a background check for people to see if they have mental health conditions. I mean, that's reasonable, isn't it?
Yes, I think it is. I would be a little bit concerned about now that people like Governor Kane in Virginia are expanding what goes into the background search. We need to know what that is. I mean, there are 80,000 people that have already been sent in to the federal background service as having mental illnesses. Well, there are only 3,000 in the state who are committed. So who are these other people, and what's being sent about that we don't know?
Well, let's talk about some of those people. Let's say someone has a condition like schizophrenia that is treatable by drugs,
right.
But if they don't take their drugs, they are a danger to themselves and society. That you don't have to institutionalize that person, but I don't think we want that person to own a gun.
No, we don't.
Okay, so that would be one group. I mean, let's just take a list of people and see if you, because I think we may agree on this, at least I hope so. Someone who's committed a violent crime in their past should never own a gun.
Right.
You agree?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Someone who's committed domestic violence, even if it's just a misdemeanor. But has beaten their spouse or wife, they shouldn't own a gun.
No, I don't think so.
Okay, we agree on that. Someone who's I think pretty much ever been committed to a mental institution for any period of time, except a mistake, shouldn't be owning a gun. Yeah.
Now that I would disagree on, because I think there are people who suffer from things such as depression that are not dangerous people.
All right, fair enough. Okay, we'd have to see what they were committed for.
Yeah, and those are also among the most treatable of conditions.
Right.
So that I think you could recover from that.
Now, one of the things that the gun lobby is really anxious to protect, and I, for the life of me, can't understand why, is what's called the gun show loophole. All these things we're talking about, all these protections that you can't be mentally ill or committed a violent crime, if you go to a gun store, they run that background check, which you and I support. You go to a gun show, or you go to the web, or you go to your neighbor, and they could sell you a gun, and you can be as crazy as the Virginia Tech killer and have committed violent crimes in your past, and there's no check. Now, I know that's more gun control, but clearly, if the law has purpose for a gun store, the same law should be applied for any sale of firearms, shouldn't it?
Yes. I actually don't know why it's not there. I think it's a matter of, well, the Supreme Court doesn't require it for one thing, and it's a matter of cost, and they don't have to do it, so they just.
But it's a good idea. I mean,
right,
it's public policy.
but they don't have to, and so they just don't. And I think also people believe that gun control opponents believe that what the data show, that there is no correlation between tight gun control laws and lax murder rates. I mean, I pulled up the numbers.
No correlation?
None at all.
Oh,
I pulled it up today.
Great Britain has had strict gun laws since 1996, and what do they have? 30 gun fatalities a year?
I pulled up today off the web the murder rates in this country, and then went to the Sarah Brady, the gun control
but you
website.
Compared state by state.
No, where they grade them, and you have like Louisiana and Maryland have the exact same murder rate. Louisiana is given an F in gun control, and Maryland is given A-, and that's throughout the many states.
Here's the distinction. You're comparing states. I'm comparing countries. If you compare states, look, D.C. has a very strict gun control law. You can go across the 14th Street Bridge from Virginia, which has one of the most lax gun control in the nation, bring in your rifle with you. Unless we have checks on all our borders between states, it's understandable that you can buy a gun in Virginia and go into Maryland. So I don't think those statistics are meaningful. To me, the meaningful statistics are country statistics. If you look at England, Great Britain entirely had very strict gun control after there was a massive shooting of children, as I recall, in Scotland in the 1990s. They instituted massive gun control. Even the police don't carry guns. Not something I support in the United States, but they had less than 100 gun fatalities a year. Now, England has a population, Great Britain, of maybe 60 million people. It's maybe a fifth the size of ours. And we have tens of thousands a year. Clearly, gun control is working, at least in Great Britain.
Well, it's not working here. And I just don't think that you can, I'm not responsible for Great Britain. I mean, I think we had to deal with our own issues. And I think the argument about going across state lines is somewhat specious, because by that argument you could get all the guns you wanted in Wyoming or Idaho and bring them here.
Well, but it takes a long time to get from Wyoming or Idaho. I'd be curious in your statistics if you have a group of states, like if the entire Northeast, more liberal area of the country, had strict gun control laws, and I don't know if that's true. Let's say New England. But I don't think that's true, because I think that the only states, like Massachusetts may have a good one, but my guess is New Hampshire doesn't. So there's no real way to test it unless you have like a large geographical area. I mean, I agree. Not many people are going to be running guns from Wyoming to the District of Columbia. But from Virginia, I mean, we drive there every day.
They could, but I don't think there's any data showing that people are coming to Virginia and getting their guns. They're getting them off the streets of D.C.
Well, for example, the snipers, the Washington snipers, they were all around the Washington area.
Right.
Didn't they get their guns in Virginia?
They may have, but they were coming from Virginia. They were
in Maryland and D.C.
Okay. In fact, I think they got them in Washington State.
Oh. We were told they got it in Washington State. Well, that is a long way to drive. So let's talk about gun control, because I think we can agree on a lot of things. You agree to close the gun show loophole?
No, actually I don't, because I'm saying that I think it's largely ineffective anyway. I don't think the gun control thing works, and so I don't know why you'd put it. The people who are going to gun shows are not the thugs who are stealing the guns, and you know, it's like
you don't have to steal a gun. There are people that go to gun shows, buy a gun, and don't go on a mass murder spree, but shoot and kill their wife. I mean, there are more than 30,000 or so gun fatalities a year in the United States. And we've done shows on this, and some are murder and some are suicide. But the heart of it is, if you agree in general that mentally ill people and violent people shouldn't own guns, why not have the same protections we have in the gun stores that we have in the gun show? It doesn't make any sense to treat them differently.
It is contradictory. I think that the gun people who go to gun shows are largely a small population. It's different in knowing somebody. You're looking at them. You're essentially doing a background check just by knowing the people. It's the same. It's a small population. Most of them know each other. I just don't think it's infiltrated to the degree that people are when they go buying guns from criminals.
Anyone can go to a gun show.
You're right.
They're in the newspaper. Right. You want a gun, you get one. And all the restrictions about, I mean, you can only buy a gun every 30 days and so forth. I mean, if you're going to have these laws, it only makes sense to apply them everywhere. Yeah,
but so people like Cho complied with the law. He very meticulously waited for his 30 days to get one gun. He waited that.
He did on that, but when it checked if you had any mental illness, he said no.
Right.
So he checked the box and said, no, that should have gone in the background check.
Right.
That should have been, in fact, my understanding is federal law requires that Virginia was lax in not giving that data to the federal government.
Virginia gives more data to the federal government than any other state.
You're right. And none of them give enough, in my view.
Well, I just think that the problem is not that we don't have enough control of guns. The problem is that we don't have enough control of crazy people who are out on the streets.
I think we don't have enough control of guns. I think there are plenty of crazy people in Great Britain. I've seen their soccer games. They go and they're violent and they beat up each other because, you know, one team beats another, but they don't have guns. And so a fist fight just doesn't do that much damage. I heard, was it Neil Bortz who said this? No, it was Glenn Beck. He said this idiotic thing. I thought it was idiotic on TV. He said that if Cho had had a knife, he could have killed the same number of people. And I couldn't think of a stupider comment than
No,
that.
he couldn't
that
have with a
comment.
knife, but he could have if he decided to bomb those buildings, if he decided to set them on fire and lock up the doors like he did. I mean, you've got to remember that the biggest weapons of mass destruction in this country in recent years are fertilizer and box cutters.
I disagree.
You don't have to have. Well,
they just don't kill as
true.
many people. I mean, yes, it's true for Timothy McVeigh. It's true in 9/11 is a very unusual circumstance. But if you look at day-to-day murders, they're mostly done with guns.
But you're never going to stop criminals by disarming the population. If you want,
I'm not asking to disarm the population. I'm saying control. I'm not saying ban guns.
Okay.
I'm saying control guns. Look at this. When we get a car, you got to pass a driver's test, and then you're registered. And yes, they know where your cars are because cars kill people too. Now, cars have a function other than killing people. I'm not quite sure that handguns, concealable handguns that are semi-automatic, have much of a function other than killing people. Shouldn't we at least register guns to the same extent we register cars? License, tests, make sure you're not crazy, and then you get a gun.
Well, that would work ideally, but the problem is the criminal element is not going to do that. So you're only having the people who are law-abiding, who are going to comply with the law to do that, and then you've just got, it doesn't do any good.
Okay, but how does a criminal get their gun, right? They got to steal it or do something. If they steal it, the law-abiding person should be required to report to the police, hey, somebody broke into my house and stole my gun, and here are the serial numbers.
They do.
Well, some do, some don't, but this way we can actually have a check. And then they know, uh-oh, these guns are missing, and they can look and see who was around in that neighborhood. I mean, to me, it's a better, I mean, if we have to register cars, maybe you don't think we should register cars. I mean, that's personal liberty, right?
Yeah, I don't see that it does much good. It's your property. It's your. I don't know why you should have to register your car, but I've never given that much thought, frankly.
Yeah,
but
I think because someone can give you a hit and run and you want to get their license plate number, I think it's the same thing for a gun. If you have something that's dangerous, you have to have a way to check it. That doesn't mean that registering a car is any great invasion of my personal freedom. Now, I don't like going to the DMV.
Right.
but it's once every 4 years, and usually I can do it by mail. To me, these are limited restrictions that in an emergency can be very important.
Right, and I would agree with you, like I said, in an ideal world that it would work that way, but it just won't. The people that are going to take a gun and kill somebody are not people who are going to stop and register that gun. And so it's just not going to do anything but inconvenience the law-abiding.
Well, actually, I disagree in a couple ways. One, a lot of murder isn't done by the criminal that's knocking over liquor stores. All right, a lot of murder, frankly, is domestic violence,
You're
where
right.
you have a man. Usually, it's 99% of the time it's a man, so I don't mind saying a man. A man who is not the kind who's on a killing spree.
Right.
Someone who needs a gun, wants to kill his spouse or significant other, and then goes to a gun show, buys one, and sort of. This is not someone who's likely to steal a gun. Frankly, it's someone who's likely to buy a gun and do damage.
Right.
And if he has a history of domestic violence, I want to know that. I don't want this guy owning a gun. We're going to take another break, folks. The toll-free number is 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275. Feel free to call in and add your 2 cents. We'll be right back after this.
Where was your...
This is Mommy's bed. Me and Jenny were jumping on it. Mommy's gun fell on the floor. I was a cowboy. Bang, 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 bang. I said, Jenny, wake up, wake up. It's just pretend. But she wouldn't wake up. If you give me a fish...
If you give someone a fish...
You feed them for a day.
Teach someone to fish.
You feed them for a lifetime.
Give me a fish, and you'll feed me for a day. Teach me to fish, and you'll feed me for a lifetime.
Through Volunteers of America, you can help change lives in your community.
Oh, hey, mister, studied algebra in school and got a better job than I could. You take the last couple.
Oh, no, mister. Stuck in an entry-level job because you only learned basic math. I don't have a boss riding my butt like you do, so you take it so you can get back to your desk.
You know, I probably should, but maybe Miss AP Calculus with the $200 haircut in the big office upstairs would like a cup.
Oh, no, mister. What was your name again? Never mind, it doesn't matter. I'm too busy doing important things to care. I just came down for some sweet and start.
You know, if my limited math abilities weren't keeping me from getting a better job, I'd quit this afternoon.
I don't blame you. But thank goodness you're stuck here because we really need someone to make the coffee.
From Washington, back to the Inside Scoop with Mark Levine.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop, where we discuss the issues of the day. I'm your host, Mark Levine, former congressional attorney for the Democrats. My guest today is Melanie Scarborough. She is a columnist for the Washington Examiner. If you want to join in the debate, pick up that phone. Don't hesitate to dial, agree or disagree with any of us. The toll-free number, 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275. Melanie, we've been talking about violence and why I support greater gun control regulations. I think there is a particular kind of violence that it actually is more searing to the soul. Maybe you think all violence is equal, and we'll get to that. But to me, violence that is for a specific race or religion or ethnic group or sexual orientation, to me it's a different kind of violence. What they did when they crucified Matthew Shepard, or when they drugged James Byrd in a truck behind, or when someone burns a cross on a black person's yard, to me that's a different thing from even just a murder, killing someone or harming someone, because it's not just about that victim. It's a victim, everyone of that ethnic group is a victim. If you burn a cross on a black person's yard, that's not just a warning to them, it's a warning really to all African Americans in that town to get out. So the Democrats passed a bill. I shouldn't say just the Democrats, it was a bipartisan bill, though it was just about all the Democrats and just a few Republicans. Just passed out of the House a new hate crimes bill. And what this bill would do is it would say that if you commit a crime and it's shown that it's done for one of these particular reasons, then you're punished more severely. And one of the things it does that I think is very interesting is if state prosecutors aren't prosecuting the crime, then the federal government can intervene. And one place where I know this was because of is the movie Boys Don't Cry, which is a true story. Did you see the movie?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, it's about a transgendered person in Nebraska, I believe it's Nebraska, who was murdered. And after she was murdered, the police did nothing, and the prosecutors did nothing because there was prejudice against transgendered people, and it wasn't prosecuted at all. This is a bill that I think is likely to pass the Senate, but George Bush has threatened to veto. What's your position on the bill?
I oppose hate crimes in general because I think that for the law to work, it has to be objective. And what you do when you inject bias in there is you inject subjectivity. You're criminalizing someone's motive. And it really is, we can stipulate that all those things you talked about were horrible, heinous crimes. But it really shouldn't matter if one person is dragged behind a car versus another person dragged behind a car. It's not less of a crime. I think it's unconstitutional. I think it violates the Equal Protection Clause. We should all be equally protected by the law. If my house gets burned down and your house gets burned down, it shouldn't be somehow more of a crime because I'm a woman and some misogynist did it to me. It should be, I think in a free society you have to punish behavior and not thought. And one of the things that's been the outgrowth of hate crimes the past 10 years is we now have hate speech. Well, then you've criminalized the First Amendment, that people can't even say what they want to say.
And I'm not talking about that. Just to be clear, the Ku Klux Klan has every right to have a rally, and I think they're disgusting, and then people have a right to have a counter rally.
Well, but it's a hate crime.
No, it's not a hate crime for
them
to have a rally.
Speech.
It's hate, but I'm not talking about hate speech. What I'm talking about is the difference between, in effect, if someone goes to, I would never do this, but if a person goes to their neighbor's yard and burns wood on their property, that's arson, it's a crime, it's a misdemeanor, they should, I don't know, pay a fine. If somebody goes and burns a cross on that neighbor's property, same wood, same amount of damage to the lawn, probably requiring $50 in reseeding max, not much damage, very, very different story, because what that does is you are saying, in effect, not just to the people in that house, but to all African Americans in that town, get out, more violence is coming. It's a threat, and it's a very large threat, not just to the victim, but to the whole community. Do you not see a difference between burning your neighbor's wood on their lawn intentionally and maliciously and burning a cross?
I do think that, I do see it, and I think that's a valid point, but I think it's a very slippery slope to start saying that we're going to inject bias into law and that criminalizing motive. I just don't think
that happens all the time. All the time. We ask people, did they intend, juries have to decide, was it intentional murder or was it accidental murder? That's the difference between murder and manslaughter. It could be the difference between the death penalty and going to jail for 5 years. So we look at people's motive all the time. We're just adding racial bias as a motive.
I would be more sympathetic to racial bias because that's something that can be determined. I do worry.
You don't think sexual orientation bias can be determined? You don't think if someone writes, die fags across a lawn, that's worse than someone who writes, Johnny loves Mary across a lawn?
Well, you brought up the Matthew Shepard case. That's a perfect example. The prosecutor, the lead investigator in that case, said that it turned out those people that wasn't a hate crime, that they were just a bunch of thugs, methamphetamine addicts looking for money.
I don't buy it.
The guy was dressed well. They took him off. Well, then if you don't buy it, but then you're putting it's a subjective thing.
It's up to the jury
But the
to
investigator
decide.
of the crime said it was not a hate crime, and yet he's the patron saint of hate crimes. And you think, well, it wasn't even right.
First of all, I wasn't on the jury, but I've read a lot of the evidence. I don't buy it. One of the concerns with this bill is that in Wyoming, they are going to bend over backwards to say it wasn't a hate crime, and that in Alabama, they're also going to bend over backwards to say it wasn't a hate crime. Yeah, they drugged James Byrd behind the truck, but they just didn't like James Byrd. Forget the fact that they had said all this racist stuff in the past. Look, at the end of the day, a jury would decide, so it's not you or me that would decide the facts, but don't you see a difference between harming someone because you're a jerk and a killer, and harming someone as a message to, it's simply a greater crime. You spread fear throughout a whole population. You're telling black people are gay. You say it's okay for racial bias. Let's talk about sexual orientation. If people say and write on a lawn, whatever, all fags get out, or we'll kill you, that's a threat. That's a sign. That is a sign not just to the person who's threatened, but to an entire community. And there, it's a greater crime.
But all crimes are motivated by hate.
But there's levels of crime.
Yeah, but if someone stabs you, that's not an overture to friendship, no matter what your race, no matter what your sexual orientation.
But there's a difference between someone who stabs someone and someone who says, "I'm going to kill all blonde-haired women." And you would be much more in fear than I would from this same killer, even if he never harmed you, never touched you. Now, we don't know of any great bias against blonde-haired women. If there were, then maybe it should be protected in law. But we know there is a massive bias against gay people in America, against blacks. There was a guy, I recall, I think it was somewhere in Northern California, where he literally separated the Asian kids and shot only them. So there's some real sick people in the world. It seems to me that those are crimes of conscience that cry out for a greater punishment.
I think that actually the numbers are, the FBI last year reported about 1%, less than 1% of all the reported crimes were what they qualified as hate crimes.
So
in
it doesn't
fact, it's
affect
not
that many people.
A big outcry in the country that it's no, it's not.
But see,
and it's
that's
not
my
worth
point.
the risk. It's going to be such a danger.
But see, that's my point. It doesn't affect that many individual victims, but it affects entire communities. You don't see marches for Mr. Jones who kills Mrs. Jones. You just don't see it. What you see, though, is with Matthew Shepard and with James Byrd, there's a reason why entire communities are up in arms about these cases and not about other cases, because they see it as not just a harm to the individual, it's a harm to the community.
It's a very dangerous thing to start making it where it's subjective. If a woman is raped, it shouldn't matter if the man did it because he hates women or because he hated that particular woman. The crime is the crime. You have to punish the behavior and not the thought, not the motive.
Well, and rape is generally, I think, partly prosecuted because it's sort of man-on-woman crime. That's sort of a different thing, I think, from a hate crime. I mean, to me, the classic example really is the cross or a threat.
Yeah, but that's your choice. That's not what the law says. And so
Well,
what you're
but I
going to
think the
have
law
is
should
all these...
say it. I want to change
yeah,
the
but
law.
the law of unintended consequences always obtains, and there are going to be all kinds of problems.
What's the problem? Give me an example of where you would fear it.
Like that with the Matthew Shepard thing, or if one, take him out of it, because that's inflammatory. But take something where a person is killed similar and they're homosexual, and it was not motivated by hatred of homosexual. It was just incidental.
Then it's not. Well, then they wouldn't. Then the answer is they shouldn't be charged in the first place. And if they, listen, yeah, a guy kills another guy and he happens to be gay. That's not a hate crime. It's not a hate crime in my view. It would be a hate crime if this is a person said, I'm going to go out and kill gay people.
Yeah, but
and
then
goes
somebody
and
has
does
to
it.
define what qualifies as hate speech. I guess the hate speech is the part that bothers me the most. I think what these laws are really about is about trying to curry favor with people, that protecting the sensibilities or the feelings of people, because it's not really, there aren't that many cases. And I just think you're trying to...
This is a nation that's had a long history of lynching, of using, and what is a lynching? It's very interesting. It's not just killing one person, hanging up one black man. It was used as a lesson. It was used as a way to say, it could be you, and you better know your place and you better watch where you are. And to me, what a hate crime is, in essence, is a lynching. And the lynching doesn't just harm the victim. It harms the entire community.
Yeah, but that's an anachronistic example. We don't have lynching anymore. We do have speech that is inconvenient and unpopular and politically unpalatable, and it's going to be more and more governing of that rather than governing the behavior. And
see, as far as I'm concerned, if a Ku Klux Klan marches and they don't kill anyone afterwards, they have the right to march. But if they do, well, they have to be very careful, and I don't have any problem with that.
Well, then you're following my argument that it should be the behavior that's punished, not the speech and not the thought.
It's the behavior plus the speech makes for more danger. I think it's a greater threat. Before we close on this issue, I would just say, if you threaten someone's life, that's a crime in America. It's speech. It's speech. But if I say I'm going to kill you and I make it believable and I really act like I'm not making a joke, but I really do it, that's assault. That's a threat.
Right.
And it seems to me that there's a difference between killing one person and killing one person in a way that is meant to be a threat to the entire community.
But we already have laws that protect things that are actionable. We have laws against libel. We have laws against slander. We have laws against inflammatory speech. We already have laws that say that you can't do things that materially damage people. These are not about that. These are about you can't say things that hurt someone's feelings.
No, it's not about hurting someone's feelings. It's about people being afraid.
You don't get to define that. I mean, you might have a very reasonable definition of hate speech, but you don't know that a jury would. Juries aren't always reasonable.
You put it in the law. I mean, you say that if someone...
You can't possibly define what everybody can or can't say.
That's what we do. Oh, well, not what they can or can't say, but you define whether this killing was based on animus or not. Look, all the time...
All killing is based on animus.
It's based on a particular racial animus or sexual orientation animus.
But you don't know that. If it's a drive-by shooting, you don't know the person happened to be
Then you don't charge it. You only charge it where you have a person with a history of hate. Who does that?
With a history of hate? What is a history of hate?
If somebody goes out and says, I'm going to kill all this kind of people, and then goes through with their plan, that's different. If someone, I don't know what would be shown in the Matthew Shepard case, but if they said, we're going to kill him because he, there was a case where, it was some talk show where some guy was on a talk show and I think it was Sally Jesse Raphael, and the gay person said that he liked this guy and then he went out and murdered him thereafter. I don't know on that one. It may just be because he was insecure or whatever. But if you have someone who is out to get a certain kind of people, then I think it's terror in the community, and that's something that should be punished in addition to the victim.
Could also be incidental.
I want to move on to another topic. We only got a few minutes left, so when we come back, I want to talk about the District of Columbia, because this is something that I was actually very surprised by your position when you told me on the phone. We did a show yesterday on voting rights for the District of Columbia. Now, they are not a state, and according to the Constitution right now, they don't have voting rights. I think that should change. I don't think that any American should be without voting rights. And I want to get to your comments on this. Before I do, though, as we go into break, I want to show a poster that I'm going to talk about after the break. This says, "Bring democracy home, support D.C. statehood." And it shows a person, a child who's at the Capitol of the United States. Of course, this is the center of American democracy. And even though every state in the United States has that right, we don't have that right in the nation's capital. We'll show the poster again after the break. Folks, if you want to join in, the toll-free number is 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275. You can also comment on the blog at radioinsidescoop.com. We'll be right back after the break.
Some people in Fairfax County don't know what public access means.
Some think it's just another channel on the dial.
But it's much more than that.
It's the voice of the people.
People like you.
Your neighbors,
your friends,
or your family.
People who want to share ideas,
opinions,
cultures,
lifestyles,
art,
sports, music,
events,
entertainment,
history,
science,
beliefs.
People who want to learn about television,
producing,
directing,
cameras, audio,
lighting,
editing, or radio, talk, music.
Whatever you think people should hear.
Public access is the place where everyone has a voice.
And it's the place where that voice gets heard.
A place where you can create your own form of personal expression.
So what do you want to say?
Whatever it is,
you can say it here.
Because we're public access.
For the people,
by the people.
It is about balancing our choices between the gray of the concrete jungle and the stunning beauty of the real one, between a stoic facade of granite and the fury of the canyon. It's why there's EarthShare, the simple way to find balance. EarthShare is the workplace giving program bringing the leading environmental groups under one umbrella. Support EarthShare, support them all. EarthShare. Please ask your employer about workplace giving. To learn more, visit our website.
Thousands of kids in this country have everything it takes to go to college, except the money. The United Negro College Fund. A mind is a terrible thing to waste.
From Washington, back to the Inside Scoop with Mark Levine.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. Sometimes we get more discussion here between the shows than we do actually on the show. One of the camera operators was saying, why is it a crime to threaten to kill someone? It actually is a crime, and it's not even a new crime. It's been around ever since the English common law for hundreds of years. It's called assault. You may think assault is actually hitting someone. It's not. That's battery. I'm a lawyer. I can tell you this. That's why you often charge with assault and battery, where you threaten to harm someone and you do. And I have no problem with punishing assault, which is just words. But if a guy says, I'm going to kill you, and stalks this woman and doesn't actually harm her, that's a crime. Do you think that shouldn't be a crime?
It goes back to my point that we already have enough laws on the book, I think, that punish things that are actionable, like you're saying assault. I'm saying libel, slander, inflammatory speech. I just think hate speech is somebody's political definition.
Well, there's a difference between hate speech and a threat. There's definitely. There's a difference between saying, I hate all these kinds of people, and go out and kill, and I'm going to kill all these kinds of people, and that's the difference right there.
And hate speech can be that I hate all these kind of people. Well, that's a political opinion.
No, I
that's
agree.
not, and so, but
I
that's
agree.
what will be criminalized, and that's what I think is dangerous.
It wouldn't be criminalized.
It
The Ku
could
Klux
be.
Klan could still march. It could be, but that's not in this bill.
Okay.
That's not what this bill does.
But this bill is an extension of previous hate crime laws that didn't include it. So we can see that there's just going to be, there can always be a progression.
But see, what this bill mainly does is it says if local authorities aren't prosecuting, the feds will step in. And I think that's good, because I think there are places in Alabama where they may not prosecute a racially motivated crime. There are places in Wyoming where they may not prosecute a sexual-oriented crime, or Nebraska and transgender. And all this bill does is says when the local authorities are too prejudiced to step in, maybe we don't want to say that because it's insulting to people, but it happens in America, and the feds can do so.
And the feds stepping in is almost always a bad idea. And nobody can know better than local authorities what's going on in their own localities. The feds wanted to decide that it's because they're too prejudiced. There again, you've introduced subjectivity into the law.
Well, but there's all kinds of subjectivity into the law right now.
That's true, but you need
when
to minimize
Rodney King
it.
was beaten up by the police in Simi Valley, and I think it was an all-white jury, acquitted the police officers under the local law. The Fed stepped in, said that's not fair. They had a trial, and they convicted the people. Fair or unfair? Are you not sure?
I'm not sure. I haven't thought about that enough.
Okay. To me, that's similar to what's going on here. I want to move on, though, and change the topic to the District of Columbia, because Inside Scoop's out of Washington. We live in the Washington area, and yet if you live in Virginia or Maryland, you get to elect 2 senators, you get to elect a representative. If you live in the District of Columbia, you pay taxes, and you send people to fight off in wars, and you have no representation. Not only do you have no representation in Congress, but you don't even get to elect your own mayor. You elect him, but heck, if he's overturned, he can be overturned by Congress. Shouldn't the residents of the District of Columbia have the same rights of every Americans of the 50 states?
No.
Why not?
Because they're not a state. The Constitution clearly says that Congress should be made up of representatives from all the separate states, and the District of Columbia is not a state.
So you are going to join with me and support a constitutional amendment to change that?
That's an honest argument. If they want to rally for statehood, then that's an honest place to go. To say that we should just ignore the Constitution and give them voting rights.
So you give me a constitutional argument, not a moral argument.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they should pay federal income taxes. They're not. I think that would be consistent.
That would
it's
be
not
consistent
to say.
You know, a lot of D.C. residents would like that.
Yeah.
Their population
We'd all become DC
would really grow then.
I'll move
Okay,
tomorrow.
so let's be fair then. Do you support D.C. statehood?
No, I don't.
Because I do. Okay. And clearly that's constitutional. I mean, if you look at the Constitution, basically any place can become a state. I was just looking at this the other day. In fact, I pulled it out. It says that no state can be created by a piece of another state unless the state agrees and the Congress agrees. Well, Maryland gave up the territory that's the District of Columbia 200 years ago. So Maryland's already agreed. All it would take is a vote by Congress, by the House and by the Senate, signed by the President, and D.C. could be treated just like any state in the United States, a member of the House, 2 senators. What's wrong with that?
Well, I think, first of all, the argument of giving it voting rights, it's just naked political pandering. It's people like Jack Kemp who are trying to make a win for the Republican Party by what they think is enfranchising a city that's majority-minority, and that's just not a good enough reason to change.
No, that's not the reason. I mean, I realize
that's their reason. They announced that's their reason.
That people do it for pandering purposes. I'm doing it because we are Americans and should have the same rights as every other American.
But they do. I mean, that's
they do. No.
But it's the difference is, and they keep. I forgot who it was. It made this pathetic argument that this was the big civil rights issue of his generation.
It
isn't a civil rights issue at
all.
all.
What makes a civil rights issue is because it's a majority black. But let's just take it apart from the race for a minute.
The difference is that no one has to live in Washington, D.C. It's like complaining that you go in Pizza Hut and you can't get a burger. If it's that important to you, then go live in Maryland, go live in Virginia.
So no one should live in our nation's capital, and we should change the whole. I mean, look, that's kind of how the founders saw it, right? I mean, when they wrote this Constitution, and the founders make mistakes too. Remember, they had the 3/5 clause.
Right.
There's lots of bad stuff. Right. I mean, I revere this document, but I revere it with its amendments, not as originally written. In the original document, the founders saw that people would leave their home states, come convene in Congress for a couple months, pass some laws, and go home.
Which would be a much better system.
Maybe so, but we're not in 1787 anymore. We're not in 1800 anymore. Washington exists. It is a city. Unless you want to shut down Washington and say everyone leave, there are people that are born 3rd, 4th, 5th generation here. I mean, are you really saying if you want to vote, you have to leave?
I'm not as opposed to the idea of statehood as I am to the idea of giving it voting rights without statehood.
Okay.
That I really am opposed to.
All right,
I mean, statehood is an
honest
honest argument, and if they want to have it, that's fine. I really don't care
I
about that.
got to tell you something. Most D.C. residents prefer statehood over what they're doing now.
Sure.
What they're doing now is this compromise, and the reason they have to do the compromise is because of the pandering. Because Republicans say, well, we're not going to have a state that gives us 2 more Democratic senators and a Democratic representative. We got to throw some stuff to Utah too.
Right.
That argument, we can both agree, is intellectually dishonest because it's not about protecting people's rights.
No, it won't do anything at all. It'll keep it the same balance in the Congress, and it won't make any difference at all.
But I'm glad to hear you support D.C. statehood. Because that's
something
we can march together.
But I said I could support the idea of it. I don't think there's anything at all wrong with promoting the idea of D.C. statehood. I think there is something very wrong with saying that you should give the rights of a state, if it's not a state, in defiance of the Constitution.
Well, now, of course, they did that with the electoral vote. In 1961, there is an amendment already in the United States Constitution that gives the District of Columbia a right to vote for president. And it was passed, 2/3, ratified by the states. It's in our Constitution. Right. In fact, if it becomes a state, we may have to take it out of the Constitution. I don't know. But you have a problem with the 23rd Amendment?
No, I don't. One of my other big problems with the idea of this voting rights is the people that are pushing it, the Republican politicians. Their argument is that, well, they don't have any credibility in the rest of the world. The Baghdad looks at us and says, yeah, but there's so many more pressing issues. It's an absolute travesty what the Bush administration essentially has done to Washington, D.C. since 9/11. It's just, it's a monument to fear. The idea that this should be a free country, the capital. If they're really concerned about the way we look to the rest of the world, then they can do things like open up some of these streets that the president's been shut down. Open up the National Mall. All of these things that are just these restrictions on freedom that have been put in place that have no bearing, that are irrational.
Melanie, I agree with you, but I don't think it's an either-or kind of question. I mean, this to me is a 200-year-old injustice that the residents of the District of Columbia are the only American citizens that are treated as second or, in some case, third-class citizens. Because heck, even Guam and Puerto Rico, they don't have to pay taxes.
That may be, but I'm saying that's a relatively arcane restriction that the rest of the world doesn't see and doesn't know anything about. Where they come to this country,
I know that there was reported in the Washington Post that Tom Davis went to China and was lecturing them on they need democracy in China, and the premier said, well, in your own capital, people there can't vote. So certainly dictators are using that as an argument. But I agree with you. It's not because dictators are saying this, that, or the other. The reason we should do it is it's simply unfair and unequal, and D.C. should become a state.
I think there's another problem, too, in that if you look at D.C., D.C. is one of the It's just the pathology in that city, the way it's run. It's,
not anymore.
It's
not anymore. Marion Barry's reign is over. I think Andrew
right.
Williams has done a terrific job. I think D.C. has had amazing growth in housing and in it's just a much better city than it was 10 years. I think people remember D.C. 10 years ago, and Washington gets a bad rap. Washington's murder rate is lower than the national average today. 10 years ago, it is. I'll show you statistics. I'll show you.
It's still the highest in the country.
No, it's not.
The schools are the worst school systems.
Well, schools another problem, and I agree with you.
Okay, but if you can't manage your school systems, how are you going to have the wherewithal? Just the whole idea of a city that can't manage itself as a city, and then you're going to say, well, now you're going to confer statehood on it.
We don't do that with other states. There's
we
corruption
don't
in.
have to.
Of
I mean,
course
no,
we
but
do.
there's
Have you
no
seen
other
Louisiana?
state that we've been.
I mean, Mississippi. I mean, there are all kinds of states that have had all kinds of problems and demagogues and so forth, and we haven't gone in and said, sorry, you don't know how to run your state. We're taking over. That's what democracy is all about. If a state runs itself into the ground, that's what a state can do.
Yeah, but
why should D.C. be treated any differently from any other state?
Because those states became states before those things happened. This is trying to take a city, locality that already has those problems and.
Well, I would argue, first of all,
D.C.
has far less problems than it did 10 years ago. I think it's really gotten a bad rap from the 1990s. I will show you the statistics. The murder rate is lower than the national average. It has problems in schools. Lots of states have problems, too. To me, I don't care. You got to have democracy in America.
What do you think is the advantage of statehood?
The people get representation. A lot of advantages. One, they get representation, 2 senators and a member of the House. 2, they get to control their own lives. They can't be overruled. There have been laws where D.C. passes a law and Congress says, we don't like that, we don't agree with your democracy, and a whole group of people that don't even represent D.C., without even a D.C. representative having a vote, go in and say, sorry, we don't agree with you, we're going to impose our own law.
Yeah, but there is a reason for home rule, and the reason for home rule is that Washington, D.C. essentially belongs to all of us. It doesn't belong to the residents of the district, and God help it if it did. I mean, if the part of D.C. that the tourists see, that's the pristine part, if that were controlled by D.C. government...
No, it can still be controlled by the federal government. Look, under the Constitution, as you know, the federal government can control federal land. That's true whether it's Yellowstone National Park, which is a very large area in Wyoming, to any of our national parks all across the country. The federal government under D.C. statehood, I'm sure, will continue to control the mall, the Capitol, the White House. So, you know, D.C. won't control that. But the main thing is to give the residents the right to vote, and I don't see how anyone can be opposed to that.
I think the only advantage would be it would give Eleanor Holmes Norton, who is a very reasonable person, who's a good voice for Washington, it would give her more, you know, her having a seat in Congress, a voting seat, is a good thing. But I just can't go along with the idea that you're going to confer statehood on people who can't manage cityhood.
In my view, that's an irrelevant question. People have a right to do what they want. And I got to say, I think it's a little bit of... I just wonder if some of that is, and I don't mean from you personally, but some of that argument, I wonder if it's racial bias in the sense that I don't see people criticizing other states and saying, you don't know how to run your affairs, we're gonna harm you the way they do to D.C.
Because it's not the same argument. You don't deprive people of statehood once they have it, but you do have it. There's more of a vested interest in saying you don't give statehood to someone who doesn't.
Getting the same rights as everyone else. Melanie Scarborough, thank you for coming on the Inside.